The room was sterile, cold, and filled with a tense silence, interrupted only by the rhythmic beeping of medical instruments. Around a dimly lit operating table stood a group of aliens, members of the Galactic Medical Consortium. Their sleek, slender bodies glistened under the overhead lights, eyes wide in anticipation of what was to come. They had gathered to witness something unprecedented. At the center of the room lay Captain Mira Solis, a human, or as the galaxy referred to her kind, a deathworlder. The nickname wasn't given lightly. Humans hailed from Earth, a planet of harsh climates, deadly creatures, and environments that should have killed off any sapient species millennia ago. Yet, they had thrived. More than that, they had evolved into some of the toughest beings in the galaxy, with resilience beyond comprehension. Today, that resilience was about to be tested. Mira had sustained a fatal injury during an encounter with the Scarran Raiders, a species notorious for their brutality. A jagged piece of metal had pierced her torso during the skirmish, shredding internal organs and spilling her blood onto the deck of her ship. The aliens had rushed to stabilize her, but by their standards, the injury was beyond hope. The medical team prepared for the inevitable outcome. The lead medic, a tall, pale-skinned Zelfian named Thalos, glanced at the others. "We've administered the maximum dose of cellular stabilizers. Her body's vital readings are fluctuating, but there's nothing more we can do." His voice was low, tinged with regret. "Her kind, they are strong, but even they cannot survive this." Before anyone could respond, Mira's eyes flickered open. Her hand reached up to grab the piece of metal still lodged in her side. Her breathing was shallow but steady, and her face, though pale, was filled with a grim determination. "Don't count me out yet," she rasped, her voice cutting through the disbelief in the room. The aliens exchanged startled glances. Thalos stepped forward. "Captain Solis, you need to remain still. The damage is extensive. Any movement could kill me. I've been through worse." Without warning, Mira gripped the jagged metal shard and, with a sickening squelch, pulled it from her torso. Dark blood gushed from the wound, pooling on the floor. The aliens recoiled, horrified by the sight. By their standards, this should have been her death sentence. But Mira wasn't finished. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and placed her hands over the gaping wound. The room fell silent again, save for the soft hum of machinery and the labored sound of her breathing. With a grimace of concentration, she pressed down on the wound, her fingers digging into the torn flesh. Her muscles tensed, veins bulging under her skin as she focused on one thing: survival. The aliens watched in shock, their wide eyes locked on Mira's every movement. A faint glow began to emanate from her palms, and beneath her hands, the shredded tissue started knitting itself together. Slowly, impossibly, the wound began to close. "Impossible," Thalos whispered. He and the other aliens had never seen anything like it. No species in the known galaxy possessed such regenerative power without advanced technology or medical intervention. Mira's teeth were clenched, sweat pouring down her face as she concentrated on the task at hand. The process wasn't instant, nor was it without pain, but bit by bit, her body repaired itself, muscle and skin fusing back together. She was using sheer willpower, her innate biological resilience, and an understanding of her body that no other species could fathom. For several long minutes, the aliens stood frozen, captivated by the sight. They had seen deathworlders survive in harsh conditions, overcome impossible odds, but this was something else entirely. This was raw survival instinct in its purest form. Finally, Mira slumped back onto the table, her chest rising and falling with labored breaths. The wound was gone, replaced by a long, angry scar. Her hands, covered in her own blood, dropped to her sides, but her expression was one of triumph. Thalos stepped forward cautiously, scanning her with a medical device. "Your vitals, they're stabilizing," he said in disbelief. "This defies everything we know about biology." Mira chuckled weakly. "You aliens always underestimate us." The other medics gathered around, their eyes filled with awe. Mira had defied death, something that should have been impossible. The Zelfians were known for their advanced medical technology, and yet here was a human, healing herself with nothing more than her own hands. "You healed yourself," one of the medics stammered, his voice tinged with disbelief. Mira wiped her bloody hands on her uniform, grimacing at the soreness that still lingered. "We're not indestructible, but we're built to survive. Earth isn't a forgiving place, and we learned how to endure." Thalos shook his head slowly, still trying to process what he had witnessed. Your species, your resilience is unlike anything we've encountered. This will change how we understand human biology. Good, Mira said, pushing herself upright despite the protests of her still aching body. But don't go thinking we're invincible. We're just stubborn as hell. The aliens stood in stunned silence, watching as Mira swung her legs over the edge of the table and stood up. Despite the exhaustion and pain etched across her face, she was alive, defying every expectation they had. As she walked out of the medical bay, Mira gave them a parting glance. Now, if you don't mind, I've got a ship to run, and next time, tell your medical team not to give up so easily. The door slid shut behind her, leaving the aliens to process the impossible feat they had just witnessed. The legends of deathworlders would only grow after this. Stories of humans, beings who could heal fatal wounds with their bare hands, would spread across the galaxy. And the aliens would never look at them the same way again. As Captain Mira Solis strode down the dimly lit corridors of her ship, the weight of her ordeal settled heavily on her shoulders. Her body still ached, and the scar left by the jagged metal was a constant reminder of just how close she had come to death. But she was alive, and in the galaxy. That counted for more than anyone could understand. The aliens she had just left behind were probably still reeling from what they had seen. To them, her ability to close a fatal wound with nothing more than her hands was a feat beyond comprehension. But to Mira, it was just another day of being human, a species that had clawed its way to survival on a planet that seemed determined to kill them at every turn. As she approached the bridge, her crew looked up with expressions of awe and relief. They had heard the rumors, no doubt, about their captain's brush with death, and seeing her walk in one piece seemed to boost their spirits. Captain on the bridge, Lieutenant Diaz snapped to attention, but his usual professional demeanor was tempered with a hint of admiration. We heard you, pulled off something miraculous down in the med bay. Mira gave a tired smirk. Miraculous? Nah, just Earth-standard stubbornness. The crew chuckled, the tension that had filled the room moments ago easing. Mira appreciated that. They needed to laugh, especially after what they'd been through. As she took her place in the captain's chair, the view of space stretching endlessly before them, Mira let her mind wander for a moment. The galaxy was vast and filled with countless species, most of whom considered humans to be something of an oddity. Deathworlders, they called them, creatures from a planet so hostile that it seemed like a miracle any intelligent life had evolved there at all. Mira had seen the way other species looked at humans, a mixture of fascination, fear, and, sometimes, outright disbelief. They didn't understand what it meant to grow up on a world where nature itself was a relentless adversary, where the weather could kill as easily as the wildlife, and where the drive to survive was encoded in every fiber of one's being. The Galactic Alliance, the governing body of most civilized space, often marveled at humanity's achievements both in technology and in sheer willpower. To them, humans were unpredictable, capable of feats of endurance and adaptability that bordered on the impossible. And today, Mira had only confirmed their suspicions. Captain, Diaz's voice broke through her thoughts. We're receiving a hail from the Galactic Medical Consortium. They, want a report on what happened. Mira raised an eyebrow, clearly not surprised. The consortium was likely buzzing with curiosity after what they had witnessed. No doubt, they'd want to study her, poke and prod at her, try to understand how a human could survive something like that. But there were some things even the most advanced species couldn't quantify, like human resilience. Tell them I'll send them a report, Mira said, leaning back in her chair, after I've had some coffee. Diaz grinned. Aye, Captain. As the lieutenant busied himself with the communications console, Mira's thoughts returned to the moment in the medbay, the astonished faces of the aliens as they watched her close the wound. It wasn't the first time she had shocked the galaxy's more delicate inhabitants, but it had certainly been one of the more dramatic examples. Healing oneself with bare hands wasn't exactly a common practice, even among deathworlders. The truth was, humans weren't inherently superhuman. They didn't possess magic or advanced genetic enhancements like some of the other species. What they had was a deep-seated instinct to survive, and centuries of evolution that had taught them how to withstand adversity. On Earth, wounds like the one she had sustained would have killed a human 1,000 years ago, but with modern knowledge of physiology and a will forged in fire, humans had learned to push their limits. Mira's ability to heal her wound hadn't been supernatural. She had used a combination of pressure, focus, and sheer grit to force her body into overdrive. relying on the cellular knowledge that every human had learned to tap into in desperate times. It was something the medics of the Galactic Consortium would never fully grasp, how a species from a deathworld had mastered not just their surroundings, but their own bodies in ways that defied conventional science. As the ship hummed with quiet activity, Mira's thoughts shifted to the larger picture. If word of her actions spread, as it inevitably would, it could change the way the galaxy viewed humans, already seen as dangerous and unpredictable. Humans might now be seen as something more, a species capable of surviving the impossible. And that kind of reputation could be both a blessing and a curse. The Galactic Alliance prided itself on unity and diplomacy, but Mira knew there were many factions within it that feared what they didn't understand. And after today, the fear of humans might grow even more. The Scytherans, the Scarans, and the other aggressive species they'd encountered would undoubtedly take note. What did it mean to fight a species that could heal mortal wounds in the heat of battle? What did it mean to face a race that could, against all odds, survive the impossible? But it wasn't just about survival. It was about thriving, about taking that stubborn spark of humanity and turning it into something more, something that could shape the future of the galaxy. Mira sat up straight in her chair, her eyes narrowing with determination. If this galaxy had learned one thing today, it was that humans weren't just survivors, they were warriors, and no matter what came next, no matter what battles lay ahead, the galaxy would know that Deathworlders wouldn't back down. Captain, Diaz called again. We've cleared the system. Orders? Mira glanced at the star map, a sense of purpose rekindling in her chest. Set course for the Scaran border. We've got unfinished business. Aye, Captain, Diaz replied, punching in the coordinates. As the ship prepared to jump to faster-than-light speed, Mira leaned back, a slight smile tugging at the corner of her lips. The galaxy was about to witness what it truly meant to cross a Deathworlder. And this time, there would be no turning back. The stars streaked into long lines as the Perseus entered faster-than-light travel, the hum of the ship's engines vibrating beneath Mira's feet. She sat still in her captain's chair, eyes locked on the viewscreen as they surged toward the Scaran border. Her crew moved efficiently around her, but a quiet intensity had settled over the bridge, like the calm before a storm. Mira could feel it too, an unspoken understanding among her crew. They weren't just running missions or defending their borders anymore. They were headed straight into enemy territory, with vengeance on their minds. The Scarans had pushed too far this time, and humans had a way of pushing back harder than anyone expected. Captain, Diaz said softly, standing beside her now, are you sure about this? We're in no condition for an all-out assault. Mira turned to him, her expression firm but thoughtful. She knew what he meant. The ship was still nursing its wounds from their last battle, and her own brush with death had rattled the crew more than they let on. They needed time to repair, regroup, plan, but time was a luxury they didn't have. I'm sure, she replied, her voice steady. The Scarans hit us when we were vulnerable. We can't give them the chance to do it again. If we wait, they'll just keep coming, and next time, we might not be as lucky. Diaz hesitated, then nodded. Understood. We'll be ready. As he moved back to his station, Mira allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. She had always known that leading meant making hard choices, but ever since they had entered this war with the Scarans, those choices seemed to grow heavier by the day. Every step she took felt like a gamble, every decision a potential tipping point, and yet, in her core, she knew this was the only path forward. The memory of her recent healing resurfaced in her mind. The looks of disbelief on the alien medics' faces were still fresh, but Mira hadn't had time to fully process the implications. It was one thing to heal herself in the heat of battle, to tap into the primal survival instincts that humans were known for. It was another to think about what that kind of power, if it could even be called that, meant on a galactic scale. Captain, Nova, the ship's navigator, interrupted her thoughts. We're approaching the Scaran border. Scans indicate several small vessels patrolling the area. Mira leaned forward, her eyes narrowing at the tactical display. The Scaran ships were there, just as expected, a loose perimeter of patrol vessels guarding their territory, but they didn't know the Perseus was coming. Not yet. Prepare to drop out of FTL, Mira ordered. Keep our signature masked until we're in striking range. I don't want them knowing we're here until it's too late. The crew moved with purpose, their training kicking in. Every member of the team knew what was at stake. The Scarans were relentless, a race that thrived on conquest and cruelty. They had no mercy for their enemies, and humans had quickly become one of their favorite targets. Mira clenched her fists. the lingering soreness in her body reminding her of the Scaran brutality. They had left her for dead, but they had underestimated her, underestimated humanity. That would be their last mistake. The ship shuddered slightly as it dropped out of FTL, and the stars snapped back into their familiar positions. The Perseus drifted silently in the blackness of space, cloaked and ready. "They haven't seen us yet," Nova reported, her voice a low murmur. "Good," Mira said, her eyes fixed on the Scaran ships. "Let's hit them hard before they even know we're here." She gave the signal, and in an instant, the Perseus's weapons systems sprang to life. Pulse cannons and torpedoes locked onto the nearest Scaran patrol ship. Mira watched the display, her heart pounding in sync with the ship's weaponry. Fire! The Perseus unleashed a torrent of energy, and within moments, the first Scaran ship was engulfed in a fiery explosion. Before the other patrol ships could react, the Perseus pivoted, firing a second volley. Another enemy ship was obliterated, its debris scattering into the void. "Two down," Diaz reported, excitement creeping into his voice. "They're scrambling now." Mira could see it too. The Scaran patrols were breaking formation, their confusion evident in their erratic movements. They hadn't expected an attack this deep in their own territory, and they certainly hadn't expected a lone human vessel to be the one leading the charge. "Keep up the pressure," Mira commanded, her voice calm but filled with resolve. "Don't let them regroup." The Perseus weaved through space, its weapons hammering the remaining Scaran ships. For the first time in what felt like forever, Mira felt the upper hand. They were fighting on their terms now, not running, not hiding, but striking back. As the last Scaran ship exploded into a cloud of debris, the bridge of the Perseus erupted into a brief cheer. Mira allowed herself a small smile. The crew had needed this victory, a reminder that they weren't helpless, that they could fight back. But Mira's smile faded quickly. This was only the beginning. The real battle was still ahead. The Scarans wouldn't take this incursion lightly, and the humans knew what was coming. "Captain," Nova spoke up again, her voice tinged with concern. "I'm picking up something on long-range sensors." "It's large." Mira's eyes flicked to the display. A massive Scaran warship was moving into the sector, far larger than any patrol vessel they had just faced. It bristled with weaponry, a hulking beast of a ship designed for one thing: destruction. Mira's pulse quickened, but she remained composed. "They've sent in the cavalry," she muttered, mostly to herself. "We can't outrun that thing," Diaz said, his eyes wide with concern. "We're not running," Mira replied, her voice sharp and determined. "We finish what we started." The crew fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them. Mira could feel their uncertainty, but she also knew they trusted her. They had been through too much together to back down now. "Prepare for combat," Mira ordered, her eyes locked on the approaching warship. "And brace yourselves. This is going to be rough." As the Scaran warship drew closer, the Perseus powered up its shields and weapons, ready to face the overwhelming odds. But Mira knew one thing for certain: humans weren't known for playing it safe. They fought with everything they had, even when the odds were stacked against them. And today, the Scarans were about to learn that firsthand. The warship loomed large in the viewport, its shadow casting over the Perseus. Mira could feel the tension on the bridge, the collective intake of breath as the enemy prepared to strike. But she stood tall, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair. "Open fire," she said, her voice calm and steady. The Perseus launched its first salvo, the bright streaks of energy racing toward the warship. The Scaran vessel retaliated, unleashing a barrage of weapons that shook the Perseus to its core. But Mira held her ground. This was what it meant to be a Deathworlder. To face the impossible and win.